Hello, Internet, and welcome to the 14th episode of the Fried Neurons podcast. And in order to explain to you the context of this episode titled Daddy Issues, I'll have to tell you about the daddy issues of the person we're talking about. And that person led to the word Kafkaesque. If you don't know what Kafkaesque is, I'll let you know right after I cue the fucking... The dictionary meaning of Kafkaesque is the characteristic or reminiscent of the oppressive or nightmarish qualities of Franz Kafka's fictional world. Well, the more applied interpretation of the word for me is the emotion of gloom and sadness and shame relating to powerlessness in the presence or in front of authoritative figures. Well, that's my interpretation, and I have to make sure everybody knows that I've just read his books. This is in my area of expertise. It just makes me curious that a man, more importantly, was able to capture a singular human emotion and its branching effect on an individual so precisely. Kafka's work extensively explores the space of human emotion that deals with powerlessness, humiliation, shame about one's own identity, and wanting to be ended than feeling disgusted by who we are. If you've already watched a few videos or even briefly touched on Kafka's work, you'll know that Kafka's life and his writing, in general, was largely dictated by his daddy issues. Maybe it's not the most sensitive way of saying it, but it encompasses how clear it is that Franz's father, Hermann Kafka, had a huge impact on his life at large and the literature he's created as a consequence. The most blatant evidence of this statement comes in a book named The Judgment. The Judgment is a story about a businessman who's to be married and lives with his widowed father. His father is an aging man who needs help with his day-to-day functions. One fine night, when the son is tucking his father into bed, the father stands up strong on the bed, towering his son. He accuses the son of betraying his lonely friend and bachelors, shaming his mother's memory, and betraying his father and treating him ill. The father tells his son that he has no friends and no valuable input to his own business. By the end, the father condemns the son to death by drowning. In addition to stating, "You are an innocent child, really, but at heart you are a diabolical human being." The son then plunges into a nearby river, having heard his father's sentence, and dies. Kafka brushes up on the shame of existing and feeling like a burden specifically in another one of his stories titled Metamorphosis. This is probably the best known work of Franz Kafka, and in my opinion, the saddest of all stories he's ever written. Metamorphosis is a short story about a salesman who is working to pay off family debts and getting bread for his family. One fine morning, the salesman finds himself turning into an insect. His family sees this as a major inconvenience as Gregor, the salesman, loses his job and is utterly useless to his family post his transformation. The family moves out all the furniture they can out of his room and makes sure the insect does not do any more damage than already done. His sister is the only one who is sympathetic, but at first. Soon she loses her hope of recovery and stops seeing his transformation as an ailment and more of her own problem. His father violently beats him if Gregor ever leaves the room, and his mother only stares at him in pity. They throw garbage at him as his room is good for nothing but a garbage bin, and that's all he gets to eat. The family works to make ends meet, and because Gregor lost his job, they have to get tenants. The tenants keep complaining that there's a big insect in the house and they refuse to pay for however long they've lived, and they say they're going to move out immediately. Eventually, Gregor feels like such a burden on his own family that he refuses to eat the trash that they throw at him and slowly starves himself to death. Finally, the family takes a breath of relief and decides to go on a vacation after the insect has died. The same sentiment echoes in The Trial, a book about a man who's arrested for a crime he never committed. He never bothers to ask anybody what he did and is silenced over and over again every time he pleads his innocence. He loses his promotion and loses his entire social support because of this case, and eventually 2 bureaucrats come and take him to a quarry where he's stabbed in the heart and left for dead. All these stories reflect the predicament of not being in control and being in constant disliking of oneself. Not to forget the lack of approval which is at play here. Kafka spent most of his life working day jobs in Prague and had a series of unsuccessful love affairs. His loneliness and strong sexual urges would often lead him to brothels and this was a big source of shame in his own mind. And as you would have expected, he was always hung up on his father's approval. On reading his letters to his father, which is an actual book, you should look it up, you would see that how psychologically abusive his brute father was. Franz Kafka narrates an incident where his father left him in the balcony to freeze in anger once because a young Franz asked for a glass of water at night. He also mentions the damage he perceives from the times his father would just lash out at him for the tiniest word of contradiction. He also mentioned feeling timid and brittle in contrast to his strong and muscular physique and wanting to be squashed like a bug every time he saw his father's physique. In addition, Franz Kafka actually never wanted his work published. He actually instructed people to have it destroyed post his death. But luckily for all of us, that wasn't done. Reflecting on Kafka's work is always weird for me, because I don't quite completely understand it. But part of why I'm talking about this and sharing this with you is that on a personal level, I find art that's Kafkaesque to be very attractive. I mean, I don't know if Thom Yorke fans agree, but Radiohead songs are extremely Kafkaesque to me. Fake plastic trees, daydreaming, and Last Flowers to the Hospital, Creep, all of them come to mind as good examples. I'm not that much into art, but like a few of the artists that I've come across portray a great deal of sadness. Tetsuya Ishida is one of these artists. A lot of Kafkaesque art, which is defined as Kafkaesque, which is termed as Kafkaesque art, actually has a carrying style of Vincent van Gogh, who also is an amazing artist. Part of the reason why I covered this story is that Kafka's story is an argument I kept giving myself when I was starting this podcast. I was very conscious about the material I wanted to share. And I've wanted to do this for a while. Like I think I went through college wanting to do this and never getting around to it because I was very conscious about it. I don't know, I wish Kafka would have been felt better when he was alive, but unfortunately there's nothing we can do to ensure that. On the contrary, there is enough evidence to suggest that he lived a very sad life given his love affairs, his deals with his father, and his unsatisfying day jobs along with his disease-ridden life. He died at the age of 40. He never wanted his art to be shared post his death. So basically, in conclusion, Franz Kafka's work is beautiful and nightmarish at the same time. Check out Radiohead's music. I love it. If you think something's worth sharing, especially in the age of YouTube and the internet, go for it. Maybe someday it'll be epic cringe material. But if you think that's your artistic pursuit, you should try it. I mean, the worst case scenario is you'll get booed. Which is fine. We all make mistakes. If you have doubts, you should show it to your friends. And if you think it's awesome and they think it's terrible, you should still post it. I don't know, man. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed today's episode about daddy issues. And like, share, subscribe, please. Follow us on social media for memes. And support us on Patreon if you can and think the content is worth it. And I hope to see you next week. Goodbye.